Hi, I'm Katy Sewell. Welcome to the Bittersweet Life. It's a show that's not littered with advertisements like so many podcasts are these days. You're not going to hear an ad burst through like a typical ad break on a commercial radio station. This is a show that's mainly funded by listeners. And right now, we're asking you to hear the call and help us create a show that is both peaceful, no loud ads, and thought-provoking, but also well-funded. If we can't pay our bills, we can't make this show anymore. And our hope is that you appreciate what you find here and show your support with whatever you can afford. And we have a goal. We would love to have enough people pitch in on a monthly basis so we can rely on over $1,000 a month in donations. That would really help stabilize this program. To keep this show going with all of our other work obligations, we have got to outsource some of the weekly work. At a very minimum, I would love to have some audio editing help. But we currently have no budget for that. But maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the call and help. Maybe you'll become a part of our inner circle. And you know what? We will thank you for your donations. You'll receive tons of bonus content, live meetups, one-on-one interactions, handwritten thank you notes, and more. Just visit patreon.com/thebittersweetlifepodcast. For $5 a month or more, you can tell us you love the show, support the show's continuation, and get a ton of thank you gifts in return. That's patreon.com/thebittersweetlifepodcast. You'll find links to donate in the show notes. And I want to thank Gail and Joan, Joanne and Linda, and also Patty for hearing this appeal last week and responding to it right away. $5 a month doesn't get you very much these days, but it will get you a lot here. I recently paid a poet sitting on the side of the road $5 to write a poem about this podcast, and I want to read you what he came up with. His name is Oliver DeLeo, and here is his poem about the bittersweet life, about living abroad and moving home, and all of the other questions that life brings about. He writes, "We wander through this world, cement serpents, cities, rivers and streams, purpose and dreams, seed of our soul grown in the soil, in the home away we roam. Now wonder where vision leads, and it seems I'm never too early or late, but what awaits or lies behind, there isn't at least a piece of where I'm from on my mind." What do you think? Was that worth $5? And do you find this show to be worth at least that much to you? If so, consider supporting it. And thanks. Welcome to Rome. This is The Bittersweet Life with Katy Sewell and Tiffany Parks. Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katy Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Tiffany over in Rome, Katy in Seattle. And today, Tiffany, like a news journalist, you're bringing us the latest from Italy.
Oh yes, I've got my finger on the pulse of the expat world, because there's been big news coming out of Italy that has made a lot of people, I imagine, very excited. A lot of people who've always wanted to move to Italy and who didn't have the opportunity, because Italy has launched a new digital nomad visa, is I think what they, like in shorthand, what they call it. And this has already existed in Spain and Portugal for a little while, some other places in the world, but Italy, I think, is only the third European country to do it. And it's basically a 1-year renewable visa for people who already have work, either working remotely for a foreign company or someone who is self-employed and freelancing or has their own private clients. But basically the rule is like you have to be getting your income from outside of Italy. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of requirements. You have to have been doing this type of work for 6 months, like meaning working remotely for 6 months. You have to be what I don't know, I can't remember what they're highly skilled, I think is the phrase they use. But I mean, again, that's very open to interpretation, highly skilled.
Sure.
Obviously, there has to be work that can be done remotely. So, clearly there are certain things that lend themselves to that and certain things that don't. And you have to make a certain amount of money. And I believe you have to have your own health insurance. They don't want people taking advantage of the free Italian healthcare system.
Interesting.
So,
Do you,
yeah.
I have a couple questions. Do you happen to know what the minimum threshold for income is?
I saw it.
Because
Let me just double check
I know they have the same thing kind of for the retirement visa. You have to prove you have a certain amount of money in the bank, and
Mhm.
it's a pretty substantial amount of money that you have to prove that you have. But yeah, I would think if it's like an ongoing job, hopefully it would be lower.
Yes. It's definitely lower. I'm not seeing that you need to have a certain amount of money in the bank. I'm not seeing that here. I know in Portugal you do. But it looks like you only need to make about 28 grand, but that's in euros per year. Like you only have to prove that that's what you're making.
Okay.
So it's pretty accessible.
Hang on,
And
I'm gonna look up what 28,000 euros to dollars is.
it's probably about 30,000. It's very close right now. The dollar is very high.
Yeah, 30,203 and 60 cents.
Yeah, okay. I don't understand this phrasing. Help me understand this. It has been announced that the visa is open to workers who have an annual income of at least three times the minimum level required for exemption from participation in healthcare costs in Italy. Like, it's worded so convoluted. You have to make three times the amount of the minimum required for exemption from participation in healthcare costs. If
Okay.
you're exempt from participating in healthcare costs, it means you're exempt. You don't have to pay for your healthcare because you make too little money. I guess that's what they're saying. So you
Right,
have
so
to
you have
make
to make
three
three
times
times
that.
that. So
Right.
what is the minimum
So it
exemption?
must
Do you
be,
have any
well, it
idea?
must be one third of 28,000.
Yeah.
It says that you have to make three times the amount. So yeah, it does. Health insurance appears to be the most important requirement of acceptance, with individuals needing to take out robust plans valid for the entire period of their stay.
So, as a person who's only used the free Italian healthcare system for the 1 year I lived there and got a pretty sizable concussion while I was in Rome, mind these episodes to find out how. I How would that actually work? Do you have any idea? Like, would I have to go in and be like, here is my insurance card when I checked in at the emergency room? How do they even know to accept an insurance?
I mean,
Because
that's a good
they didn't
question. I
ask
mean,
me for anything. So,
well, in Italy, anyone can go to the emergency room, tourists, illegal immigrants, whatever, legal people, obviously, anyone can go to the emergency room and get free care. But you cannot go into a public hospital and book like I need a mammogram. You can't go in and book that unless you have the Italian healthcare card.
oh,
You can
okay.
you can't not in a public hospital or a public clinic. You can go into a private place and
Mm,
book it but it will cost a lot more.
right.
It's not inaccessible the amount of private and in fact health insurance is becoming more and more popular here because a lot of people prefer to use the private sector and they're like, well, if I'm going to be paying for all of my visits to do them privately, I might as well have insurance. So we don't have health insurance here, but it's becoming more and more common. So I assume if you were to go to the emergency room, you might show that, or you might, because usually when you go to the emergency room, if you're like, okay, I'll tell a little quick story. I had a friend who was living here, and she was actually not technically illegal because she was English and it was before Brexit. So she could live here, but she didn't have residence. Like she'd never gone through all the paperwork.
Hmm.
She didn't speak Italian very well, and she just kind of let it slide.
Yeah.
And she fell and broke her elbow, cracked her elbow. I was with her at the time. Um,
Ouch.
and
Terrible.
yeah, it was pretty bad. She went into the emergency room and basically just said, "I'm a tourist." And
Hmm.
I remember I was with her. And she's like, "Yeah, I'm a tourist. I'm from England. I happen to speak Italian. But yeah.
Yeah.
But if she had been a legal resident, she would have had a health card, even as a foreigner. But even if she was a resident, she would have had her health card. So if you go into the emergency room, it's expected that either you are a tourist and you actually are, and it happens, or you're some kind of you're a citizen or you're some kind of foreigner with some kind of document to your name. I guess if you were to go into the emergency room, probably nothing would happen, but you couldn't get any regular services.
Yeah, like routine care is off the...
Exactly.
That makes me want to ask, Tiffany, in all those years that you were an illegal in Italy, what did you do? Did you just like forego any kind of medical care in general? Were you just kind of going with the sturdy, I'm in my 20s, early 30s?
I was very, very rarely sick. I can remember maybe 2 occasions. And one time I went to a private dermatologist, and paid because I had a skin issue. But I think one time I was really, really, really sick, but it was probably a bad stomach bug. But it was like one of those stomach bugs where you think you're dying, like you really, really feel like you're dying. And so I went to the emergency room.
Yeah, you're like, I think I have cholera. And they're like, well, you don't. You're going to survive. It's the flu.
Yeah, it was something like that. I really think that might be the only time.
Yeah. And now that you're legal, you're just doing all the regular things, mammograms every year.
Oh yeah, well that I do. I do all those women tests that we got to do.
Yeah,
I do that, and then but what I need to do, which I haven't done in a couple years, is like get my full all my blood and urine tests and take them to my main doctor and be like, check this out, make sure I'm okay. I haven't done that in a while. You can get a physical. Like I haven't had like a basic physical.
So do you have any idea, like for this digital nomad visa, is it like completely open-ended? Because it has that must have insurance for the entire duration of.
Well, no, it's 1 year renewable.
1 year. So yeah. Okay. So 1 year you have to leave or you have to apply again, basically.
Yes. Yes. And here's the hard part. The hard part is that you have to prove you have a place to live. And that is kind of the catch-22, because it's very difficult to rent an apartment, as you and Derek probably remember. I mean, it's difficult to rent an apartment, full stop. But it's very difficult when you don't have legal. First of all, it's very difficult if you're not in the country. And secondly, it's very difficult if you don't have paperwork yet. So you'd have to potentially go to Italy as a tourist, find a place to live, but convince the people that, you can. I mean, how would you? I don't even know how you would do it, because you'd have to. Who knows how long the application process takes?
Yeah.
I know Italy. I know Italian bureaucracy. They don't do stuff fast.
No.
So minimum, I'm talking a minimum of like 3 months. Minimum. I mean, I remember having my interns complain, and every single intern, every single one said the same thing. They came to Italy on a student visa, which you get from the consulate in your home country before you go. You get your student visa, and then once you get to Italy, you have 7 or 8 days to take it to the police station or the immigration center. Yes. And file all your paperwork, and then they eventually give you your permesso di soggiorno, which is how you prove you're legally there. A visa isn't enough. You've got to get the permesso di soggiorno. And so many of them said, I've been here since September, now it's May, and I finally got it, and I'm leaving in 2 weeks.
Yes, I remember that nightmare. I went through that with Derek.
Yeah,
because he had to do that whole thing, and it was literally that experience where you think you have everything in order, and you go to the post office to file some of it first before you go out to the place on the outskirts of Rome.
This is hell.
And they did that thing that you had jokingly warned me about, which was, well, you don't have this particular stamp. And you're like, what? What are you talking about? We have everything. No, you're missing this one stamp. And then we spent an entire day going to some neighborhood I've never seen again since I've been to Rome all these times. Like, I have no idea where we were, to get this one stamp from these one people and take it all the way back to the post office and then wait for the long process to go pick it up in person. So yes, it's almost easier to be illegal in Italy than it is to be legal. But they do that themselves. Like,
that's true.
It's just because it's so many stamps and so many different people having to sign off on different things. Not
Yeah,
to
well,
mention the people here in the States. That guy, I remember the Italian man that we went to meet with to get this whole process rolling before we moved, and he was in no hurry either. So, I mean,
yeah, yeah. So you're gonna have to convince a landlord to be like, okay, I need a signed contract for this place, but I can't move there until my application is approved, which might be in 6 months. They're gonna be like, no way. I have to rent this place. This place is empty now. I need to rent. I'm not going to hold it for you for 6 months. So unless you have the money to pay it for all that, I think it's
well,
probably a bigger investment than it sounds like. I think once you actually try to do it, you're going to have to probably pay for a place. But I can't imagine any Italian landlord letting you rent a place unless they lie and like give you a kind of a fake contract, which how were you going to even know people who would do that for you?
what if it was like, I mean, kind of like when we moved there, we had a place where we could land for a month. Do you think that would be enough? Like, as long as you're going to somewhere, you're not
But
going
even
to move
still,
into the
Katie,
street.
how early did you set that up?
I don't know.
How far in advance?
I don't remember.
Probably, I mean, it must have been relatively recently before moving, I would assume. I mean, I guess maybe on Airbnb you could book a place like 6 months out and be like, okay, I'm going to be here for the month of April 2025 or something. Maybe.
So how much would a listener have to bribe you to say that they were living in your apartment?
There is not almost not any amount of money that I would do that for because it is such a headache. I mean, it is such, you can't even imagine the headache that it would be. I would have to hire a lawyer to drop a contract. I would have to figure out how, I would have to definitely go to like the city, my municipal area and register that I had somebody there. Actually, I would definitely have to register the person with their passport photo and say that they're there. I'd have to inform the trash company and I'd have to tell them that we have another person living in our house.
Oh.
And so our trash bill would be more. I would have to inform, I mean, technically, when someone moves into your place, they're supposed to apply for residency. I mean, this is if I'm doing everything up and up, if I'm doing everything correctly.
Right.
And then, of course, I would have to pay taxes on it, on the money.
So how much would somebody have to
so-
bribe you to not do it on the up and up?
Yeah. See, but that creates a problem because if you're creating a paper trail for yourself, you're putting a contract out there and putting it in the hands of the Italian government. No, no, no. That I wouldn't do it for any amount of money because I could get arrested for that.
At least
You could
10
get
years from
arrested.
now, you might get arrested for joking
you'd
about
be
the snail's
surprised.
pace of the
The
bureaucracy.
bureaucracy is slow, but they do, yeah, they can enforce laws. The bureaucracy and the police are not exactly the same people.
True.
They have a financial crimes unit. Like they
Yes.
have an entire police force that is just financial crimes.
Yeah.
That could only be possible in a country where tax evasion is like the public sport.
Yeah. Okay, so given all that, how good of news is this, in your opinion?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's good news for a lot of people who are dreaming of moving to Italy and don't have Italian relatives in their background, don't have someone they can marry, don't have a university they're going to. It's hard to move to Italy. It's hard to come up with a way to do it legally. And so this is a great opportunity for people who really want to. But on the other hand, I'm like, Italy is already, I mean, and I say this as an expat, right? Okay, I'm a citizen now, so I'm kind of exempt.
Yeah.
But I became as an expat. I came as a foreigner
And illegal immigrant.
okay, why do you constantly mention that, Katie?
Well,
Like,
because
not
I think
something I'm proud of.
it's an interesting part of your story, and it's something that I think people always have like when you talk about illegal immigration, you don't necessarily think about, electively moving to countries. We always frame it as like these people must move from their country because of war, because of famine, and there are a lot of people who are doing it for dreams, for fun, for aspirations. So it's just an interesting layer, I suppose, that I like to highlight.
Let's say undocumented, Katie. Do we
Okay,
have to say illegal?
undocumented. Fair. True. Better
so-
better words. Use better words. Yeah. Okay.
So, I'm saying this as an expat, but the truth is, There are a lot of foreigners in Italy right now. Like it's the country is overrun. It's at its breaking point. And I mean, I know that there are so many tourists, and the number of tourists in the city are going to absolutely dwarf the number of these digital nomads, probably 1,000 to 1, if
Mm.
not more.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's not going to probably make a difference. But, it's the center of Rome has become one giant Airbnb. I've so few Romans, especially, regular, non-filthy rich Romans live in the center of Rome. It used to be there were a lot of a lot of older people, who had these apartments back when they were not that expensive,
Hmm.
especially in the close suburb. I say suburbs is not quite the right word. The neighborhoods right outside of center, like Monteverde, Ponte Milvio, Testaccio. These neighborhoods were once working class neighborhoods, and the apartments there were very reasonable. And so ordinary Roman families were living there.
Hmm.
And now they've become very expensive areas to live. And so you used to see like, okay, yeah, there's the foreigners and there's the Airbnbs, but there's also a lot of these, older families. But now it's just slowly, you can just see that sort of the demographic change. I don't know what the number of Airbnbs is, but it's ridiculous. Like
Hmm.
it's just everywhere, everywhere. And, Venice had to put a day trip tax on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Rome has most Italian cities have a tourist tax for, for the nights that you spend in the city to offset whatever the trash the trash collection of all the tourists and et cetera, et cetera. But now for Venice, because Venice is a major stop for cruise ships, they finally have installed, I think it's a great thing. It's a day tripper tax to Venice. If you come into Venice by train, by ship, whatever, you have to pay a certain amount of tax. And it's not in addition to a hotel overnight tax. It's either or. So if you're paying a hotel, you don't have to pay the day tripper tax.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, the city has been kind of devastated by the cruise ship industry because these cruise ships come in not even considering the pollution that they cause and the way the water is raised by these giant ships coming in because they displace so much water.
Hmm.
And that's a major problem for Venice. But the people who are coming ashore don't really spend very much money,
Yeah.
because they're eating on the ship. They're going through a tour guide company that's through the ship. Maybe they're buying some trinkets at the souvenir shop. That's about it.
Hmm.
So Venice has really been, overrun by tourists who aren't supporting the economy in any way.
Couldn't they decide to not allow cruise ships to dock near them?
That's what they've been working towards. And I think I'm not going to say either way because I can't remember and I don't want to say something that's not correct, but I know that that was something that a lot of people were pushing for many years. And I feel like they succeeded, so maybe they're having to dock at like a nearby, whatever, it's nearby. They're going to
Hmm.
find a way. They'll find a city that's close enough and they'll bus people up to Venice because it's
Hmm.
just too many people who are cruising the Mediterranean want to go to Venice. It's,
Right.
it's the top site. But there are port fees. When you're a cruise ship, you do have to pay port fees. But
Hmm.
again, that money will go to the government, great, but it doesn't go to the people.
Right.
It doesn't go to the merchants.
Hmm. So when you think about this digital nomad visa, I mean, there are two ways to think about it. That it will, like, again, kind of continue this trend of flipping Italy to more foreign people living there. But then there's also the individual, like, maybe I could move there,
Yeah, exactly.
which,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not going to say that it's bad or good. I think it's wonderful for people who do dream of moving to Italy. And Italy has had a problem in recent decades of, the brain drain.
mm,
The intelligent and well-educated Italians are jumping ship for, places that are going to pay them properly,
hmm.
or pay them at all.
Yeah.
And so they feel like, wow, we're losing so many great professional people who could really be supporting our economy. So I think that's one of the reasons that they've instituted this. They're like, well, maybe we'll get some people in the country, but who are gonna bring money in, right? Because the idea is like, okay, I'm living in Italy, but all the money that I make comes from outside of Italy.
Right.
So that's just more money for Italy, right? That's
Right.
going to be spent in Italy.
Do people have to pay taxes, do you think, if they're a digital nomad?
I I don't I don't think they have to pay taxes to Italy. Now that's a really good question because as far as I know, Italy does not have I know that Italy does not have a citizenship tax requirement, which America does. America is one of two countries in the world that taxes its citizens no matter where they live.
Right. I know. Lucky you.
Yeah, well, you're exempt if you make under a certain amount. You do have to report your income though. So you do have to file your taxes, but you don't have to pay unless you're making over, I think it's like 120,000 a year.
Oh, that's good.
And you only have to pay on what you make over that.
Oh, that's good.
So,
yeah.
So yeah, it's not terrible. I mean, it's terrible if you make a ton of money, then you're actually being double taxed, and I don't really think that's fair personally. But that's another story. What I was going to say is Italy does not have citizenship taxation, but it does, as far as I know, have resident taxation, which would in theory mean that if you are living in Italy and you're a resident, like you're an official resident there, which you would be if you were on this digital nomad visa, whatever you make anywhere in the world, you owe taxes on it to Italy since you're living there and taking advantage of all of the public services that the country offers. You're not taking advantage of the healthcare though.
Yeah.
So that's a big chunk of it. Like a big chunk of taxes go to healthcare.
Yeah, that was
so
what I
I'm
was going to
really
ask.
sure.
Yeah, what else? Because I would think that most of it goes to healthcare.
Oh, here we go. You see, this article is perfect. I've just got my question answered immediately. Applicants must be tax compliant in Italy before applying for the visa. Okay, again, what does that really mean? Most frequently, the Italian taxation office will need to speak to their equivalent in the country the applicant hails from.
Oh, good. So it's one person in an office talking to another person in an office about you and your tax bracket and such?
Yeah,
Yikes.
that
could take a
seem
while.
like it would take long at all.
No.
Speak to an Italian tax expert before you apply so that you understand what tax you'll need to pay and the associated paperwork. If tax violations occur, the office will immediately direct the contravention to the authority that originally issued the visa. The bottom line, based on the information that's been made public so far, you're going to have to meet a long list of requirements. No kidding.
So what does that mean? My brain just fell asleep while you were reading that. So
Well, it's not really clear. It says you have to be tax compliant, but what exactly does that mean, tax compliant?
What if this is just like a good news story that really is actually impossible to fulfill? They're like, yeah, we're granting the new digital nomads, but nobody will actually get in.
I think you might be right. They launched this on April 4th. So they started accepting applications on April 4th. So if I were an investigative journalist, I would be following this and I would be interviewing people who had applied and following them to see if they actually get it. But I'm not an investigative journalist, so I'll just have to Google it.
Maybe someday I'll go for it. I can't do it while the cats are still alive. I guess I could bring them.
Why not? You can totally bring them.
Yeah.
You can totally bring them. I mean, look at our guest. She brought her cats. Come on.
That's true. She's talking about our guest Bree, who came to Rome with her two cats.
Her name for a second.
Mark and Chainsaw.
Yes.
Well, that's all very, very interesting. And I think over on the Patreon this week, perhaps we will talk about if a person should move to Italy if they've never actually been there before. If they're like, yeah, digital nomad, I've been over in Portugal, I've been in Spain, I'm going to just pop over to Italy and start living there now, assuming they can navigate this paperwork.
Or even people who maybe have been to Italy as a tourist and have been like, I fell in love with the place, or maybe they lived in Italy as a student, 20 years ago, and they just had a blissful experience, and they're like, I got to move back there. I got to go back there.
Should you? Should you is the question.
Should you? And what should you think about before you go?
Right. So if you want to hear that discussion, become a supporting member of this show. I don't know. What do you think of the term that I introduced last week, the Bittersweet Lifer, as a name for our supporters? Does it sound too much like being in prison? I don't know.
Kinda.
Does it? Yeah. I don't know. I tried it. I was like, Bittersweet Lifers. I kind of like it.
I got a better one.
Oh, you got a better one. Okay.
A bittersweetie.
A bittersweetie. That's cute. Although it could be a bittersweetie. It's a good piece of candy, sort of. No,
What about a bitter sweetheart?
A bitter sweetheart. I don't know. I'd like to hear some votes.
We can have these can be different
this.
levels. The Bittersweet Heart can be like the highest level.
That's true. Bittersweet Heart are the people who pay $50 a month and get all the good perks.
Well, all the perks are good, Katie. They just have the best ones. But there are the majority of the bonus content and things that we offer, the vast majority we offer to the lowest level, which is the $5 a month level.
Yes.
What are some of the things that we offer?
Well, at least 2 bonus episodes every month. And of course, there's the whole back catalog of bonus episodes you've never heard before that you can check out. I am going to write you a handwritten thank you note and stick some fabulous little prizes in there because I really do feel like you don't just take money from people, you thank them for it. Because that's, for me personally, Tiffany, how grateful I am that people will actually dig into their own pockets and help keep this show alive. What else is on there?
We're going to bring back our live meetups, which is something that we've done in the past, but we haven't been doing probably in the past year, but we want to start doing that more regularly now, at least once a quarter, have a live Zoom call with all of our Patreon supporters and talk to you face to face, so to speak, screen to screen, get your answer your questions, hear your comments, and just have a good old chat.
Yeah, maybe even do a live episode together. That's always fun. Yeah, and much, much more. Visit patreon.com/The Bittersweet Life Podcast. Support this show. We are aiming for a goal of trying to get over that ever elusive $1,000 a month mark, which would really help stabilize the footing that this show is on. And if we get there, we are going to let you hear the super secret X-Files podcast pilot, the EX-Files, which we cannot air on the main show, but is so worth listening to.
Just for people who maybe have joined us recently, what is the X-Files podcast?
So the X-Files podcast, EX, as in your ex, is a show that I produced based on a contest that I won. I basically went live on stage in front of an audience and a panel of judges and pitched this idea in this very nerve-wracking Shark Tank type experience and won the contest and the support to create this episode. And it is basically 2 people who were once in a relationship together and aren't anymore discuss what they think went right and wrong from their own points of view. And then you edit their accounts together so that you can see where their memories line up and where they do not. And the pilot episode, the couple that agreed to do the pilot episode, they are so raw and so honest. And it is fascinating, Tiffany, to hear some really basic things that they do not remember the same. Things that you would think would be fundamental to their understanding of the relationship. So absolutely worth listening to.
It's such a great concept.
Yeah, and maybe one day it will be made, and that's the reason why it can't be aired on the main show, because someday it might be owned by somebody else. But for now, those of you over on the Patreon, if we can cross that $1,000 threshold and actually hold there steady for a couple months, we're going to release that show to everybody who is over there. So it's worth listening to. And maybe I'll end this episode by playing you the trailer that I played live in front of that audience. So you get a taste of the couple that you would meet if you join us over on Patreon. So patreon.com/The Bittersweet Life Podcast. There is a link in the show notes. Patreon is spelled Patreon. And if any of you have trouble finding it and you really want to become a donor, just send us an email and we will walk you through it. bittersweetlifepodcast@gmail.com. And I guess we'll leave it there. Don't forget to join us for the discussion about can you move to Italy and should you, if you've only visited as a tourist, over on the Patreon. And we will talk to you there, and we'll talk to you next week. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katy Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
And as promised, here's the preview of the X-Files podcast. Yvette and Warren were once married, and they had 2 sons. Here's the trailer that helped me win the contest. Beginning with Yvette.
You don't have a child out of wedlock. You have a child when you're married. Like, that's what married people do. That's what marriage is for, right? And I was like, yes, that's what marriage is for, is you have babies. And I always wanted to be a mom.
I thought it was a good match. She wanted to be married more than I did because that was the vibe I was getting, and I was having second thoughts.
He was always up for it. He was always like, yes, yes, yes. He always showed up. He He was always on time. He always followed through. And I was like, okay, that's baby making material.
No. Having kids was not a motivation. It was. I think it was after we got married that I thought about it.
He was the right height. He was handsome. He's Chinese. And I was like, oh my God, our kids are going to be freaking amazing looking. Like, what are they going to look like? So we ended up having curly haired, half Chinese, quarter white, quarter black kids. Like, that was the goal. I was like, let's mix it up. Let's go. So I got pregnant right away.
Our first kid, Corrado, was born. It was 9 months after our honeymoon.
He was 2 pounds when he was born, and he was only 11 inches long. Can you imagine? He was shorter than a ruler.
He was so tiny. It was an emergency C-section. I was with her, and then the oxygen levels came down, her heartbeat went up. The doctors ran into the room and said, sir, you got to leave. I was scared. A big chance that both Yvette and Corrado was going to not make it.
And literally, like, they were delivering him via cesarean section. And there was something weird and biological that occurred where I was like, I need another baby while they're pulling the baby out. And he looked at me and was like, can we talk about this a little later? And I was like, no. It was like not at all rational. It was just like, nope, I need another baby. Like, let's do it. And I wanted to get pregnant right away. And he was like, no. So I had to wait for 4 years.
Well, with Corrado, he was such a good baby. Easy. I said, oh, we could have another one. I wanted a second child with Yvette more than she did. With Corrado being born early, she was afraid, I think.
I really wanted another child. I can't have just one. Like, I needed one more. And he was like, no, it's not going to happen. So I snuck the second one in.
We weren't planning on having a second child, but we did. I was really, really happy. Yvette, I think, thinking back, she wasn't as enthusiastic as I was that she was pregnant again.
I stopped taking birth control and I didn't tell him. I mean, that's an awful thing. But yeah. And when I considered leaving him, I was like, you don't get divorced. You see it through. You have kids. You don't. That the worst thing you can do to children is get divorced. You stay in it. So I did. I stayed in it until there was a knock at the door. And I opened the door and there was this gentleman who was like, are you Yvette Moy? And I was like, yes, I am. And he's like, throw some papers at me. He's like, you've been served.
Want to hear the whole episode? Become a sustaining supporter of The Bittersweet Life at patreon.com/The Bittersweet Life Podcast. You will find a link in the show notes. Thank you so much. Join us again. Bye.